So Sean, who did it first? Who did it best? Who did it worst?
Okay, good. I'm glad that you followed up with that because that's a important detail that a lot of people sometimes overlook.
Yeah. So, all right. So I want to start at the top, right? So, from my perspective, you, son of a bitch, I'm hot as shit. So hold on. God damn it!
Keeping all
I was
of
gonna
this.
try to work through it, but it
No,
wasn't going down.
You got to trust your gut on this.
All right. So from my perspective, you sometimes, Sean, you can be a little like, I'm working on something. I got an idea for something. And not really be like full into detail about what you're working on or what you got moving. So from my perspective, the way that the questions kind of and I was going through some things at the start of 2020, which is really the era of that really jumping off in a real way. I know you had started a little bit before. But you just kept saying like, yeah, I think I got this questions thing, and I think it's gonna start doing some stuff. So kind of take me back to the impetus, to the beginning of the questions concept, as far as doing the live game that you were doing, and let's start there because I think it's an interesting story to be told.
You're absolutely right. I am obsessed with not revealing. I think I was basically scarred by years of reading Source magazines about albums with coming in the fall, coming soon. And then a lot of these albums never dropped, or we had to wait so long for like the Badass album. That's just one. So I've always been, in all the projects I've done, whether it's like music and albums or other things, I really like to cook and have it tested and then do another batch and just make sure that it's really ready to be presented before I ever say anything, because I just don't like talking about it, because for me, I know nobody cares as much as I think that they care, or I care about it myself, but I don't want the egg in my face to, like, for anybody paying attention and be like, oh yeah, you said something, and what happened with that? Like, that's just, I don't know where that comes from specifically, but we'll just say it's those Source ads.
After this pod, if you want to lay on the couch and maybe we can talk about this in a different way, I'm here for you, bro.
I appreciate that, and we've gone through a lot of that process as well with the music that you've worked on and that we've worked on, and we'll talk about all that later too. But the genesis for the game really came from my friendship and connection with my cousin, DJ Steve Wonder, and another friend of ours, DJ Spider, who they've known each other for a long ass time. And I was introduced to them and started kind of getting into Steve's world once I had moved out to LA and was kind of just getting settled and figuring it out. And, I remember us being at his apartment that he had at the time and sort of talking about the idea of doing a trivia night and wanting to do something that took the idea of a trivia night, but also made it kind of improved upon the design, I would say. Make it that it's a little bit more interactive and feels more contemporary, where it's not just pieces of paper and number 2 pencils writing down your answers.
Right.
I've been to those, and those are fine, but, it sometimes feels like a little, out of time, I suppose. And then also doing it in a way that most trivia people are trivia people first, it would seem, and then they attack a subject. And we were coming at it from like, well, we are fucking hip hop people. We are obsessed with, these are 2 DJs, and like I have all of my history as a journalist and as a musician and as a producer. So we're like, let's take this and attack it, because we're going to bring an angle and a perspective to it that doesn't exist in this space. And so, yeah, we true to form for what you just said, we spent many months pacing around in a living room and figuring out what would it look like, how would we do it, what would the rounds be. And yeah, it was in 2018 that I believe did our first one. We did it at this bar on Fairfax in Hollywood, and it was pandemonium. We knew somebody who was
it was pandemonium out the gate, like from the first.
Well, no, I say it was literally pandemonium, and that we were doing it in a very loud, chaotic bar that would have been chaotic regardless, and a lot of foot traffic coming in and out, and not a stage. So we were just kind of in a corner that was near the entrance. So it was just chaos, but there was promise in it that definitely felt, okay, we're on to something. And then we eventually moved to a more permanent residency, the first that we had in Highland Park at this venue called Blind Barber, which is a speakeasy inside of a barber shop. So you go in through the barber shop, and they have them across the country. There's a few, but there's a secret door that takes you back into a bar behind the barber shop, and it was a little bit more
LA
chill.
Shit, man.
Yeah, so, but no, they got them in New York and Chicago as well.
Oh, some big city shit.
Yeah,
Okay.
some big city shit. Yes. But hey, look, I remember going to speakeasies in Orlando. There's a few.
Yeah, but none with secret doors. Sons of bitches.
No, sorry. So yeah, that was sort of the genesis of doing the live events.
So here's the funny thing about that, right? Nowhere in there was the lot, like in your head at this point. This is just a live event, like.
Well,
'cause I know you're a forward thinker, but
yeah, so,
was this like a trajectory of? Because I feel like in the heart of this story that we're kind of embarking on, there's a COVID story that lives in kind of both of these conversations that we're having. There's a COVID story. So like, was this one of those things where like, this is an album. This is a concept that's totally going straight on this direction. And then, hey, there's this crazy thing that happened, and then new ideas popped up? Or was there always like, hey, we could do this, then we can do that, then we can, you know what I mean?
Yes, I think that there was very much a trajectory that I envisioned, and that we had talked about doing, where this would be a dope TV show, and maybe this is a great way to do that. And, I had just come off of starting to work. When I moved to LA in 2014, I was doing a lot of music stuff. I was like real wrapped up in the Aftermath world, where I was working with the artist who was signed there, and did some tour managing and studio sessions. And, I've continued to do music throughout all that time, but it was around 2016 or 17 that I started to work on TV shows. And I worked on a TV show that was very hip hop centric, that had Method Man as the host and DJ Newmark as the DJ, and that sort of opened my eyes a little bit to like, okay, I don't think that what we're plotting could necessarily be as broad as that. I still think that there is a degree of nicheness that broadening it too much might dilute it. But who's to say? I'm open to it. But yeah, the eye on the prize for me was like, it'd be cool to do something in the television space. And then we were continuing to build. And the first thing, this is kind of like a lost chapter that we don't often talk about. We had a show on Be Real TV for a little bit, which was like a live streaming thing. And shout out to Be Real, and shout out to DJ Nels, who was there at the time, who kind of connected us. That was sort of, we didn't know it at the time, but it certainly was setting the precedent for what was going to happen in 2020, which was when all of a sudden the idea of doing live shows totally got frozen. And all of a sudden we kind of skipped steps, and we made it a TV show, albeit one that we were doing on our phones, on Instagram Live,
Now, let me ask you, was two things. One, was the live show, did the live show ever cross over in the beginning with the phone version, the internet version? Or was it totally like, hey, we're dead here, we've got to innovate?
Yes, it was that. I mean, we were doing at the live events, we were using, and we'll use.
You were streaming it, right?
We were streaming a little bit, and we were also using a service where if you were there in the building, you could play along on your phone. So the scores were being tracked. But the actual pivot to IG Live was absolutely COVID inspired. And it was, we had to cancel shows. We and we just didn't know what was going to happen. And then the idea was just like, well, it appears maybe we're going to be locked inside maybe for a couple of weeks, a couple of months. Who knows how long it's...
Did you feel, like with COVID, did you feel, before you innovated, did you feel like, fuck, we had some momentum going, like we had a thing, like this might be totally fucked up? Like, honestly, was it that energy?
Honestly, no, because there was such an air of uncertainty and, I guess, for lack of a better word, fear, that like that was honestly the last thing I was thinking about. I don't know if it was the same for you and what it was like in Orlando, and I'd like to hear about that, because I also want to hear how you had mentioned that COVID kind of inspired or at least had an impact on your album.
Oh yeah.
But in LA, I just remember, and I've talked to other people, we all remember the last day, like the day before everybody just basically went inside. And I remember leaving. I was working on a TV show at the time over at one of the network studios, and leaving early. Like, it was kind of like we were like, okay, everything needs to go. Like, we need to take everything home right now. And like, clearing the building. And I remember stopping at a grocery store and like doing a big food shopping trip to basically stock up.
You were one of those. So you were one of the motherfuckers buying up all the toilet paper and shit, and nobody else could get none?
No. I just was making sure that like I was well-stocked.
I know what kind of parents you had.
No, listen. Look, and you were in Florida, so I mean, you guys were planning barbecues like, in roller skating rinks just to follow the announcement. But yeah, there were greater concerns. Yeah. So I wasn't necessarily being like, oh man, like the questions. It was just like, well, like, let's deal with all this first, and then we'll figure it out. And then what we did ultimately wind up doing is being like, well, let's do this on Instagram, and it turned out, I've said it many times in the past, it turned out to be the best thing. It turned out to be so great because it broadened the reach, and it broadened the audience, and we also had a captive audience for people to watch. We also had a captive audience of people to participate. So it was.
I think that's a big key too, because, gosh, what was I listening to? I was listening to a podcast earlier today where they were talking about how the fascination with celebrity has changed during COVID and changed after COVID. And they were saying, like, because at one point, like, celebrities were like, we were all the same for a little while. Like, everybody was sitting around, everybody was bored, everybody, including the celebrities. So, like, celebrities kind of became like regular people for a stretch. And they were talking about how there's a change to like what a celebrity is coming out of COVID. So it's interesting that you kind of, speak on the fact that who you could get to participate, coming from a space where at the time, like if COVID doesn't happen, you maybe don't have the same access to higher profile guests to come jump on that show. So where did the idea even come from? Because like that's bold even, I think. I actually thought, I thought when you were doing it, like, oh, Sean's out here. Like, he's bold. He's reaching out to some people. Like, what did the idea come from to start reaching out to like some high profile guys to get involved?
We had some promise shown to us even in the early days. The first one that we did at Blind Barber, that Speakeasy, and I think I've told this story before, Peanut Butter Wolf and some of the Stone's Throw staff came because they're right in the neighborhood. It's right on the same block. And so he came, somebody had run into him, I think Spider or Steve might have run into him and be like, hey, you should come through tonight. He was like, yeah, I'll come by after work. So they stopped by, and then he showed us this group chat that he was in afterwards that he was taking screenshots to. And the group chat of the game, he was sending images of the game, and it was called like Rap Nerds, and he was showing us it, and it was Premiere, and it was Questlove, and it was Just Blaze, and they were all like, what is this? Well, I want to play. How can we do this? I think like Biz Marquee might have been in there too.
Oh, so man. What a group chat.
What a group chat, right. So we were like, okay, this is promising, but yes, to that point, we wouldn't have necessarily had the access. So when the pandemic began and the quarantine, a couple of weeks went by, and then it was kind of like, all right, let's do 5 shows in a week. Since we're all just home, it was an impossible pace to keep up, and I'm glad we didn't try to. But it kind of just came from reaching out. The first 5 guests that we had were Mad Skills. He was our first guest, and he was somebody who had come to the LA show. So like he was down, and like he kept showing up to games, and it was like, okay, let's text him and see if he can do it on Monday. And then Tuesday was, I believe, Open Mike Eagle, another guy who would come to the live shows. He started showing up to him. So it was like, okay, well, maybe he'd be down. And then we had Merce on Wednesday. He was somebody that, Steve knew and I knew, and we were starting to build more of our friendship and relationship. And then we had Jensen Karp, who's the creator of the Drop the Mic show that I was talking about earlier. I just sort of texted him or reached out to him. I was like, hey, like, he knew that I was doing a trivia show back in the before times. I was like, you want to do that? And he was like, sure. And then the Friday we had J.E., the producer who did Nelly's first album and is the homie. And I had worked with him, and Steve knew him, and Spider knew him. So it started off like slightly ambitious, but also it was all sort of people that we had their numbers and we could just hit them up. And then as we continued to do that and we saw that people were tuning in and they were liking it, we were like, oh, let's do that. And the ill thing about
you probably started to see people in the live, and you're like,
that's exactly what it is. If it hadn't been IG Live, I don't know if it would have been as successful, because the dope thing was that when Mad Skills would come on to the Questions IG Live, everybody who follows Mad Skills would get the notification. And then they'd pop in. And then we would see them in the chat, and we'd be like, "Holy shit, that's Alchemist is in the chat," or so and so. And then sometimes we would get a follow, and that was like a really exciting thing in the beginning. Where like afterwards, and we were like screen recording the phones, because again, you have to remember, Instagram wasn't ready for what was about to happen. So like a lot of implementations and updates happened, but we were screen recording and like looking to see like who did we see in the chat. And then it was such an exciting moment when we would get a follow. It's like, oh my God,
Was that DJ Quick? Did you see DJ Quick? Was he in like
yeah, or like Kid from Kid and Play just followed us. Like, this is crazy, So it grew organically, I would say. It just so happened to be in a crazy moment in time where like that was organic, but like when does that even fucking happen? Like there's no way I would have ever predicted that it would have happened that way. So it was really crazy to see. And then as we sort of made a more reasonable schedule, we like cut it down to 3 times a week, and then 2 times a week, and then once a week. You
gotta work through the kinks.
And it wound up being more than a couple weeks. We, at the time that we started it, we were like, okay, we'll be locked in for like maybe like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then back to normal. And then it started becoming more increasingly clear, like, oh, like this might be the reality for a little bit. So that's this might be a thing. So where in that process, did you? Well, first of all, let me just give a little bit more context to because the pandemic, like really, what you have in the pandemic. You have a wild captive audience. There was nothing for nobody to do. There weren't, obviously everybody listening went through this, but there wasn't anything for anybody to do. And I think for the hip hop head, I mean, I just remember like we were waiting for the Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary, because it's like there's nothing to watch. Like I've watched everything on Netflix, you know what I'm saying? Like nothing's going on. So really what you had as a hip hop head was Versus, right? And I wanna say
DJ the live. Who was doing the live DJ shows? There was a lot of people doing live DJ shows.
D-Nice. I mean, D-Nice was definitely
the D-Nice shows, right? And the D-Nice shows, the quarantine sessions or whatever he was calling it. So D-Nice is doing that, and Versus is happening. And honestly, from a hip hop perspective, you're either checking out D-Nice or you're checking out Versus. And like, other than that, your content is really, really like at a standstill. And I think you were able to come in and fill a void, especially for like, Versus was one thing and, D-Nice was another. But for like, to your point, the nerd head, like this was a godsend to come on the internet at that time.
You know what's so crazy? I'm just looking at like the flyer, and the first Verses was March 24th, 2020, and the first Questions was March 23rd, 2020. So we like literally. Now look, it obviously worked out a little bit better for Timbo and Swizz. They were able, but I remain confident that maybe we'll catch up to them. Like it was, it was just a crazy time.
As we continue to talk about it, that confidence might be backed up by something, because how in the universe did you transfer the idea of the question show to then, well, first, because I'm gonna drag this out a little bit.
Okay.
First, it goes from a show to a podcast.
Right.
The feed that you guys are currently listening to right now. So how did we go from quarantine version, because we've gone from live version to quarantine version, and then we go from quarantine version to podcast?
Well, what actually happened was, and it's funny that I phrased it that way, Open Mike Eagle had started the Stony Island Audio Podcast Network with his show, What Had
Shout
Happened
out Open Mike Eagle.
Yep, shout out to him. And he had approached me. This was even before the pandemic. We had talked about working together and doing something. And he had originally said, do you want to do the questions as a podcast? And I said to him, no, I don't think that works. Like I didn't necessarily, or no, actually, that's not true. This was beforehand. And I was like, yes, I am interested in doing the questions as a podcast. And we were actually pitching to some like big people. He was trying to connect me, and he was simultaneously also trying to pitch his show to other places. And ultimately the decision was just made that like he was going to do it on his own independently. And then the pandemic sort of happened. I might be getting the timelines a little mixed up here because I don't remember if what had happened was with Prince Paul preceded the pandemic or not. But if it didn't, it was shortly thereafter. And then I came to him and I said, hey, I don't want to do the questions as a podcast because I still can't wrap my brain around it. But I have this idea called Can't Knock the Shuffle that I want to do, which I did 2 seasons of with him. And that kind of got me into the game of doing the podcast thing. And then from there, I just sort of started to realize, like, you know what? I should be doing something with the questions as a podcast, because over the years that we were like, the world was shut down, it just became more and more cumbersome to watch and record on Instagram Live, especially as the world started to open back up.
Right.
It was like
people were now doing stuff.
And like, look, much love to Instagram, but like to have to hold the phone, you can't open another app. It's on the whole time. If you get a call, you're all fucked up in the game. Yep. So it was just like, okay, yeah, podcast makes more sense for this. I feel like I've built enough audience. And, we only launched the podcast in February of 2022. So it's, it's like a year now that it's been in a podcast form. And that was sort of, I was like, okay, we can continue to do, the events as we do them. We can continue to do new ideas, like doing like the Making Illmatic idea, which you came to me with, which I just thought was like brilliant. I was like, yes, let's do this. This totally works. And then also using it as a way to archive and kind of spotlight episodes that like, hey, yes, they're like technically, if you go to our Instagram page and scroll all the way back, you can listen to like the Chub Rock episode.
Right.
But here, presented to you way easier, edited, audio adjusted a little bit. So that was kind of how it turned into podcast form. And it was in like late 2020, I believe, that I started coming up with the idea of trying to turn this into a book. And it was I've told this story.
Wait, I don't think I know this part of the story.
Yeah, I apologize for people who have heard this because I know I've talked about it in a few forms before, but I basically had done Can't Knock the Shuffle. I think I had done the 2 seasons of that, and I hit up my my homegirl, Kathy Iandoli, who is an amazing author. She's a former guest on The Questions. I'd love to get her on to do a Making Illmatic as well. She wrote the book with Prodigy's cookbook, so she was super tight with Prodigy. She is writing the Lil' Kim memoir that's coming out. She did the Aaliyah book. She did God Save the Queens, which is all about like the spotlight and history of women in hip hop. So I came to her and I was like, hey, I have this Can't Knock the Shuffle thing, and I want to know 2 things from you. I want to know, how do I self-publish it, and And yeah, I mean, that was it. It was like, I want to, sorry. It was one thing. It was, how do I self-publish?
How the fuck do I get this out?
Yeah. How do I self-publish? Can't Knock the Shuffle. And she humored me and she sort of listened to me and was like, okay, this is how you could do it. Da, da, da. But I have two things for you to think about. One, why self-publish? Like, why not try to go the publishing route, like, and go through a publisher? I was like, okay, well, because I'm a DIY musician and I have to do everything myself and da da da. And then she was like, and then secondly, Can't Knock the Shuffle is great, but you also have this whole other property that you've been doing, the hip hop trivia thing. Why not also try to do something with that? And I actually said to her, I was like, well, that doesn't really make sense for me because I really want this to be a TV show eventually. And she was like, listen, you fucking idiot. That she didn't say it that way, but she was like, this is a great way to do that. So I was like, okay, well, yeah. And she kind of put me onto game, like, this is how you put together a pitch. This is how, you format it. This is the type of thing. And she's like, take these notes and figure out how you want to do it. And then I can pass it to some people if you feel good about it. And, like, I can't, she doesn't have like the golden ticket or anything, but she's like,
but I can put it in front of somebody.
Exactly. And so she did. And then I got with an agent who wound up really liking it. And then he pitched it to Penguin Random House and they loved it. And the only caveat being that it would not be a book. They were like, hey, how about we make your game into a game instead of a book? And I was like, that is another great note, and I will take it.
You know what's funny about this, and I know this being an artist myself. It's not the most awesome feeling when people start going, yeah, how about we take this song and like put a new beat on it? And you're like, well, no, it doesn't work with the other beat. And they're like, no, it's gonna work just fine. Like, how did you deal with like hey, let's do it this way, let's do it this way? Like when you, because I know as artists, you can have a vision that kind of, you can get tunnel vision on.
I think that I have bled for a lot of things already, and I think I've kind of bled out. Like, and some might say that I've like lost my artistic integrity, but I don't think that's it. And I think that there are some projects that I would be more perhaps protective and precious about. But for other things, I think that I just sort of have a more sobered, like a more sober perspective on how a lot of things work, where it's like everything has to be a collaboration, especially if you want people to get behind it. And people will feel more excited about something if they do feel like they've had a hand on it. So, none of these things were like wildly outside of the scope of what the idea was. So I was kind of open to it. I didn't feel a lot of pushback, and I was mostly just interested because to my mind, I was like, well, sometimes other perspectives can be useful, in terms of providing you direction. So I didn't feel any trepidation about it. I just was like, all right, bet. You feel like that's good? Let me explore it. Like if I hit a spot in the road where I feel like, oh, this is prohibitively not a great idea, I'll push back on it. But I was kind of more open to being like, okay, because I'd done a lot of TV shows, and doing these TV shows had kind of shown me how collaborative it is and how much a thing can change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But ultimately, it's very rare that you have like the single-minded vision Svengali who's like, this is how I pictured it, and this is how it turned out. Exactly. Like A and B it's the same. So I think I was relatively open about it.
So how do you like now that we've gotten to the point where it's a game, and I'm actually gonna ask you a couple things about the game itself in a second, but now that we're at the point that it is a game, how do you feel about the property now and looking forward? Because now the property is a whole different thing than the property was when you first created it. So how do you feel about it? Where I mean, without giving, because you're not going to tell us, because we already established that you keep everything close to the vest. Yeah. Where do you kind of see the property even going from here?
Yeah, it feels amazing. I'm so happy. I spent many years working. I've always been the primary writer of the questions, even from the beginning. And as the years went on, I sort of assumed more of the responsibilities and sort of steering the ship on it. Which is to take nothing away from everybody who helped. And, I also got to give a shout out to Double O and Natalie Garcia Mayor and DJ Marquis and Nope and Spider and Steve. It just, was, it took a lot of people to get here. And, it was an honor to work with them and to see it out now and to see it being embraced already. It's just extremely fulfilling. It's just very gratifying, and I'm excited. And I see, people talking about playing it with their kids, playing it with their families, and I'm seeing like, a lot of DJs and fans and artists and all these people latching onto it, and I'm very excited. And we're putting this out in the year of 2023 to coincide with the 50th birthday of hip hop. Mm-hmm. And I think there's going to be a lot of synergy. There was a photo museum in New York. It's called Fotografiska. I might be mispronouncing that, but Mass Appeal did a big opening there the other night, and Nas performed, and they were selling the game there.
I did see that. Yeah,
yeah, and the game is being sold in the gift shop there. So it was just like, okay, like this is cool,
And on the complete flip side, I walked into a bar the other day, and the bar had the game in the bar.
Really?
Yeah, the Commission Beer Chamber. Big shout out.
Wow! Shout out
As I walked in, I was greeted with, "Look." Yep. And I was like, fucking great.
Amazing. Yeah. So it's exciting.
So, both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, and I'm happy for all of it. Like, it's all love, but yes, I'm definitely looking forward. We've got a great thing with the podcast, continuing to do that. We're making a lot of people excited and upset with the Making Illmatic series.
Oh, yeah.
Which, like, I'll say this on the record because I've said it to you before. I have so much fucking fun doing that with you, and
it's the most fun. It's such a great concept that we do on a weekly basis.
It's such a great concept that you came up with, and it's also so great because it's just a way for us to hang out in a way that we don't get to do as often now that we live on opposite sides of the country.
Right.
So like, it means a lot to me. But yeah, like, I see continuing to grow that. I see we're definitely going to be doing live events again, sort of the triumphant return, but we're going to be doing things, I think, with an even more enhanced
It'll be tied
spin.
Into the
It'll
the
be tied
game.
into that, and just to A and B it, when we were doing events before, this was like a thing that we did in bars that most people outside of LA didn't really know about, and it was a thing. And now we've done it. I'm over 140 episodes into the show. We've had all these guests. People from all over the world have watched it. So like, there's going to be certain additions that we add to the experience that I think people are really going to like. And yeah, I mean, my hope is just to continue to grow it. I'm going to be as vague as possible because, again, I don't do details until the ink has dried. But there's a lot of exciting things on deck, and I'm just extremely grateful and humbled. I don't know if I'm humbled. This is a pet peeve of mine. Humbled is not really used correctly. Like, I don't know if you've ever read this, but like, you're humbled when something happens to you that like kind of like pushes you down in the dirt. But people often say humbled, and I just did, like, when I think they really mean to say like, I'm honored, or
right.
I'm honored. I'm not humbled, because like, I'd be humbled if I thought this was going to be great and then like it was trashed and nobody bought it. Like, so yeah, I'm just really excited. And, on a broader level, I just don't think there's ever been a better time to be an obsessive hip hop fan than now. Because there's so many things, again, like talking about Mass Appeal, the documentaries and things that they've been making.
Yeah, it's a different world now than we grew up in as far as being hip-hop fans.
Yeah, and everybody who is in the boardroom now was a fan in the 90s. Like, that's just how the time works. I was talking to my dad about something, like listening or a television show. He was talking about like, oh, like Good Morning America or something. He's like, yeah, but probably like the hip hop audience doesn't really watch like Good Morning America. And I was like, Dad, like hip hop's turning 50 years old this year. So basically,
the hip hop audience does a lot of things that you probably don't think they do.
It's way wider because it's like, think about it. It's been around 50 years. So like, if you were 10 years old when hip hop came out, like you're 60 years old.
It's also popular culture. I mean, hip hop is popular culture. So
100%.
It's our culture, but it's popular culture. And like, like in my head, this is going to turn into like how Monopoly. So I walked into a Target the other day, and they had a Puerto Rican version of Monopoly, not a Spanish version, a specific Puerto Rican version, right? And I was like, yo, there's a version of Monopoly for everything. There's a, I have in here somewhere Motownopoly.
Wow.
Yeah, it's actually our good friend Temperamentals. He left it here. He'll never get it back. But
never.
Motownopoly is a thing. So are we looking at different versions of the questions?
I can say now that we are going to create a version, exact same version of the game, but only marketed to Puerto Ricans. It's going to be, there's going to be no difference, and we're going to enforce it. Like there's going to be somebody there making sure that there's no purchases.
If you're not 82% Puerto Rican, you can't even purchase it.
Look, I don't make the rules, even though I just sort of announced it as though it was my own thing. No, I certainly look. Questlove just posted it, a couple weeks back. Shout out to Questlove, and he said, I was glad he said it. He was like, "Everybody buy this because I want Sean to do expansion packs," and I 100% want to do expansion packs. So yeah, because
we need a specific Dirty South questions.
We can even get more specific than that though, because like back in the day of doing the live events, we did like the Wu-Tang night.
The Wu-Tang night.
And you would have thought that the Wu-Tang was there, the level of energy for the W. We did like the Tribe night, bonkers.
The Tribe night.
We're doing this month in LA, we're doing a Jay Dilla night, and we're also doing Dre Day LA, where it's all going to be, we're going to do like the 20 sack pyramid.
Oh man.
So there's so many ways we could do it, and I'm excited for all of it.
From a nerd perspective, how the fuck did you come up with all these questions, bro? Like, what's really good?
I never would have predicted that I would do this.
Are you a hip-hop Bible, a walking hip-hop Bible?
I have already been criticized by some people who feel that I'm out of pocket for self-describing myself as a hip-hop brainiac, so I'm no longer going to use cool buzzwords because my friends make fun of me in text messages. But yeah, I don't know how it happened. I just kind of started doing it. I think it just stemmed from loving liner notes and knowing things and like coming up with cool factoids. And it almost became a weird muscle memory that as we continued to do more and more, it almost felt like the montage in like a Marvel superhero movie where I was like, I'm just getting better at writing questions. This used to take me like 2 hours and now I'm doing it in an hour. And now I just did it in 45 minutes and now I can write a game in 30 minutes. Like it's kind of this thing where I developed this ability. It sounds like so pretentious, but like I just started getting really good at writing questions and thinking about it. And, I was on a Dad Bod Rap Bahad a couple weeks ago, and, sometimes I'll do things like I'll listen to music and see if that inspires me, or I'll go on Genius, or I'll go on Wikipedia and just sort of see if anything kind of like triggers it. But yeah, I there's a healthy library of questions that I'm continuing to add to. So it's
how you dealing with the critics?
I mean,
the reason why I asked that is because hip hop is especially this sect that we're in, it's guarded by some gatekeepers, right? So like there's probably a lot of people out there, A, you don't belong, A, what do you know, A, all that type of shit. So how's that life going?
Okay, see, now I feel like the interview is actually starting because all of this other stuff has been stuff that I've talked about or thought about, and it's all like, this is a major concern I actually have because I do honestly, I am a white man and I am participating in what is undeniably at its core a black culture. It just is. And shout out to the Puerto Ricans and the Asians and the white people.
Right. They were there. They
were all there, and we've all been there. But yeah, I haven't encountered that yet. And, we'll clip this out and hopefully this becomes the beacon, the lighthouse for people to just attack me and but yeah, I don't know.
Encountered it? That's because you haven't replied to my DMs.
Right. I don't know. Like that's something that I haven't encountered, but it's being done as a celebration of this music, and I'm certainly not, trying to exploit it in any way. It's really just a celebration of all these things, but that is a concern that I have. Like, you know, and I don't know what to do with said conflict if and when it happens, but just sort of reply genuinely and honestly, and also listen to what they have to say. But I don't know. What do you think? Like, what's your sort of read on white people in hip hop?
Well, I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I'm not as I think, you know, from the perspective of a kid who came up in the culture, but I came up around a lot of different cultures in the culture. So it's hard for me to be a gatekeeper in that way. My biggest thing is less about race and more about wear your stripes. How did you participate? Because again, like that term being outside, like I be wanting to know that the people that are talking about this culture were really active participants in it and active consumers of it, you know, in more than just a superficial way, where the things that we talk about, and a lot of this for me is like the opinion guys, because the thing that you're doing it's not opinion based. I mean, that's more, I think that's where you kind of, this kind of maybe might slip past some critics in that way, is that it's not really you giving your opinions on hip hop. It's you talking more in fact about hip hop. But I think sometimes from opinion heads, talking heads, you know, it gets funny because it's like, yeah, but like you bought 6 CDs in college, bro. Like, I don't think you really fucking know anything about what you're talking about. So like, and I see a lot of those guys on Twitter. But see, the flip is a lot of them dudes is black too. So, right. You know, and I spot them just as easily as I spot the other ones. So I think from my perspective, I just always come from the thought process of be a steward of the culture, right. In a real way. And we can tell, like, I think for you get the, speaking from my perspective, you get the support of a Mad Skills, a Questlove, you know, all these different people who have lent their support to what you're doing because you have been vetted. You know what I'm saying? And you have been vetted and you have been listed as being authentic. And these people see the authenticity in what you're doing. But you don't get those cosigns without being vetted. You know what I mean? So I think you're already in a safe space.
Yeah, and you know, like it's something that I don't necessarily ever think to advertise because in my mind, it almost seems contrived to have to point out to people that I was outside. I have been going to these events for over 2 decades, and that you know, promoting shows or putting together albums or being sort of a piece, because you know, also coming up in South Florida, it was very, you know, diverse and it was a melting pot. But you know, I think. Look, there's nobody more protective against white assailants onto the culture of hip hop than other white guys. So, you know, I definitely have people.
Actually, this is a super fact, by the way.
Yeah, no, it's just a fact, exactly. But you know, whenever I see that, it sort of comes across as posturing as well. So that's not anything I ever, you know, endeavored to do. But I do think that you do have some points about it being less of a opinion and like it's not my place to. I don't think that there's really much value in anybody saying what's good and what's bad when it comes to art. So, let alone if you're doing it from an outside perspective in terms of like your background and your culture and being like you're not doing the thing that, you know, has historically been associated with people who look like you. I'm telling you that it's wrong. Cuz a lot of like online social media hip hop accounts are trash. And a lot of them come at it with what actually does seem to steer away from opinion and is presented under the guise of being more factual, but it's almost done in an academic way where it seems like a scientist looking at something under a microscope.
Right.
I think like the ones I'm talking about where it's like, oh, like the Kendrick Lamar album came out. Did you know that 37% of Kendrick Lamar's lyrics on this album refer to guns and 45% of it? It's like, this is so textbook and academic in a way that feels grossly removed from the actual spirit of what the music is intended to be presented as. This sounds like you're doing a fucking science project on something.
I'm not. I'll tell you from an artist perspective, I'm not with that shit. I'm not. And the reason why is because when you turn music into numbers, it removes the story. And to me, it's all about the story. Like, it removes the feeling. And to me, it's all about the feeling, right? So, like, there's a lot of accounts now. There's a lot of hip-hop accounts, Twitter and Instagram accounts, where they break down data in raps and stuff. And it's not that I disrespect it. Like, it's cool as another piece of content, but I also feel like this is a tough, without the story though. Like, but you got to give all right, you're going to break down a percentage of times that Kendrick talked about guns in a song, but like, in an album, but what's the story behind that? Like, without the story, to me, the fact is pointless.
Well, yeah, it's like
feel
coming
like
to
it's got to
somebody,
be the front of a card and the back of the card. You know what I mean?
It's like coming to somebody and being like, "Yo, how's that new Raekwon album? Like, what's the sound of it?" And somebody being like, "Well, the first track is 92 beats per minute. The second track is 96 beats per minute. Then he goes down to 87 beats per minute." It's like, okay, these are all technically true, and I suppose it's interesting as a piece of a whole. But like, to make that the whole identity and focus seems to just, to me, it grossly misses the point.
It does. It does. It throws me off a bit. Now, with that being said, my last really thought process for you is sticking on the idea of critics. Any of these facts been challenged?
There have been a couple times in the course of the games where I don't recall any of them, but there have been a few things that we put, especially early on.
It's got to be scary. Like, now I'm thinking about it, it's got to be scary to go public with facts.
It's extremely frightening, especially in a world where I know Dart Adams exists and Dart Adams knows that I exist. Yeah. So, and shout out to Dart, former guest on the show. Have done a couple things with him.
It's my guy.
I mean, fuck the doc side, like, volume 1, right?
Volume 2. I think.
Volume 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my guy, though. A lot of love for Dart.
Yeah. I definitely want to be cognizant of the fact that I'm making sure that I'm doing my research. But, as somebody who has worked as a journalist at various points, as somebody who has worked in other sort of attention detailed and driven projects and endeavors, you got to make sure that you do a couple revisions. You got to make sure that you're, even catching typos on things.
Yeah.
It's all of these things.
They matter.
The details matter. So I can't think of anything that has like recently stood out, but especially the ones that I get the most nervous about is like the sample-based questions, because a lot of times we're leaning on either credits, which is better, or who sampled, which is very useful, but not always comprehensive and correct.
Hey, and listen, so these things, I can tell you firsthand. So I got a bunch of stuff that's on Genius.
It's probably all wrong, right?
It's a struggle, man. I'm reading this stuff back and I'm like, that's first of all, that's not what I said. Second of all, that's not what I meant.
And then if they get those wrong, then the hip hop data guys are going to get your percentages wrong, and they're going to think you talked about vegetables 18% when it was actually 17%. You all fucked up.
Yeah, and then so just a quick anecdote on who sampled. So for the Dockside second mixtape, the one that we did in collaboration with Dart Adams, Zarism and I did a joint called I Rep For You, which we rapped on a loop that we pulled from the GZA album that is a Ka song. Ka has a solo record on the GZA Pro Tools album.
Yeah.
We took that loop, and because Ka says on the song, I rep for you. So we took that loop, and we took when he said I rep for you and turned that into a hook. It's just a freestyle joint. It was just us freestyling, whatever. It's a mixtape, whatever. How about that ends up on Who Sampled? That one song, of all the songs on the mixtape, that song is on Who Sampled. And it has us sampling the original artist.
Yeah.
But we didn't sample the original artist.
Right.
We literally stole the beat. It's a stolen beat. It's a Rock Marcy beat. We rapped over the beat. So,
right.
There's some, when you're trying to figure shit out too much, it sometimes it gets fucked up. And that's a specific idea of like one time where it's super fucked up.
Come back next week to hear the second part in my conversation with MidaZ, in which we talk about his writing process, the pretty crazy life events that inspired and cast a lot of influence on this record, and a lot more. Big shout out to the Questions Patreon. Appreciate your support as always, and I invite anybody who wants to support the show and get some cool free bonus pieces of content each week to join up. The Questions is a member of the Stony Island Audio Collective. Shout out to the Dad Bod Rap Pod who recently had me on their show. The show's theme is by MidaZ the Beast and Zarism. I'll see you next time. Peace.